There's a lot of data that shows now that your employees can be your most credible reputation builders, right? So if we're reaching them with the right message, engaging them in the right ways, and then giving them the tools, they can be incredible ambassadors.
Welcome to Signal in the Noise. I'm your host, Dan Gaynor, and in this episode, we delve into Gina Judge's illustrious career at PepsiCo, exploring her insights on empathy and understanding your audience, and so much more. Gina shares how PepsiCo consumers see the brand as a whole, emphasizing the importance of putting yourself in their shoes to truly add value at every part of society and every aspect of the business. She elaborates on how PepsiCo's sophisticated approach to communications, where innovation and reputation are key. And she also discusses the company's data-driven strategy to comprehend why employees stay, underscoring a culture of care and impact. Looking ahead, Gina envisions a people-forward approach to employee communications, which are as relevant internally as they are externally. And she's really focused on using storytelling as this critical component of reputation building, empowering the employees at PepsiCo to be ambassadors for the company's global brand across 318,000 of them. And she highlights the importance of maintaining a cohesive message and investing in communicators at every level of the organization to foster high quality and digitally native storytelling. We're off and running with another great episode of Signal in the Noise. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Signal in the Noise. I'm your host, Dan Gaynor, and we are thrilled to welcome a very interesting guest. We've got Gina Judge, Global Head of Employee Communications at PepsiCo. Welcome, Gina.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you on here. We've talked a few times off the record. I'm glad that we finally got you on the record. Where are you beaming in from these days?
I'm beaming in from Weston, Connecticut, which is close to our headquarters in Purchase, New York.
Very nice. And you've been at PepsiCo for a long time, 15 years as I understand it. We actually have a shared background in the agency world at Weber Shandwick, but walk me through the career arc a little bit. Before we get to your fancy job right now, tell us a little bit about how you got here, what were the forks in the road, and was this all part of a master plan?
Oh my gosh, I wish I could say it was part of a master plan, but I think we all know that it doesn't always work out that way. I like to think of my career arc in 4 different chapters. So childhood is actually one of them. My parents owned a French cafe and bakery when I was growing up, and my sister and I always used to joke that it was forced labor. But I think it was really there that I learned a lot of values that were really important. Things like having a good work ethic and teamwork and customer service and being part of a community. So it was a very small restaurant, and we did everything there, from mopping floors to bussing tables to washing dishes to showing up at 6 a.m. to make the muffins. I mean, I think as a young person, while we kind of thought it was a pain at the time, in looking back, I really appreciate how that got me thinking about the world.
Well, both from an entrepreneurial spirit and a straight up work ethic. It's amazing to hear that grounding. Very cool. Okay, so that's chapter 1. And you did that for your entire upbringing, I'd imagine.
A good portion of it. And then I went to journalism school at University of Wisconsin, and I was naive enough to think that the Chicago Tribune was going to hire me right out of college. And they told me to go work in Peoria, and I really couldn't afford to do that at the time as I was on my own. So I thought the next best thing was to go into public relations. And so it was sort of by default that I ended up in the industry, but I'm so grateful that I did. I think the second chapter was really agency life, which you mentioned. We have that common background. I was really fortunate to work at a number of agencies: Weber Shandwick, Fleischman Hillard, Leo Burnett. Agencies are amazing training ground. Not only do you get exposed to incredible mentors, but you learn a breadth of skills on a variety of different businesses. So to me, that was just learning on steroids. I got a lot of brand and marketing communications experience on consumer packaged goods, white goods, technology, personal care products. So to me, that was really about spreading your wings and getting a breadth of experience and learning all the ins and outs of communications.
Fabulous. And so in that case, you're working across multiple industries. And by the way, dealing with clients who can be demanding and persnickety and inconsistent, very much shaping, I would imagine, how you structure a program, but also how you form relationships in a very intentional way, which now that you're at a gigantic behemoth of a company, I'm assuming has come in handy.
You're right. The agency days really shaped how you value learning, co-creation, and feedback. So I think hitting on some of those things that you talked about, right? Like you're learning a lot, you're co-creating with your team, but also, as you mentioned, with your clients, which is a learning experience in itself. And then you're getting a lot of feedback. So whether it's from your team or your clients or your audiences in your actual communications programs, I like to think about those three things as critical no matter what your career is, and how if you really can be open-minded with all three of those things, it kind of creates this virtuous circle that just keeps help you growing in your career.
I totally see the thread. All right. Well, I'm sorry for taking us off the path. So chapter 1 was the cafe.
Yes.
Chapter 2, journalism
life.
school. Oh, agency life. Okay.
Right.
Agency life and journalism school together. Let's go to chapter 3.
So I verged a little bit out of traditional communications into the restaurant world. So hearkening back to my childhood days, I had an opportunity to lead the full marketing responsibilities for a restaurant company in Chicago. So that was just another great way, again, to sort of broaden the skill set, add more tools to the tool belt, and in a business that I could really relate to and love. It was an interesting restaurant company that it had multiple concepts, but they were all individual concepts. So we had everything from a neighborhood tap to a 4-star Italian restaurant. And that was where I really got to think about how you create brand experiences and really think about every touch point in the communications ecosystem. But then there's obviously in the restaurant world, there's that physical touch point, right? Of like marketing extended to how they were greeted by the hostess, how the chef might come out and say hello, to how we tried to get them in a loyalty program before they left. So really interesting work in a much broader sense.
I think just not that I need to give my hot take on all these experiences, but I think it's such a fascinating allegory for the world of big corporate enterprise communications, because what you're talking about are all these different touch points that in many companies actually represent totally siloed functions, right? There's operations and supply chain and sourcing, AKA the food that actually gets on the plate. There's the experience. They could have a booth that isn't clean, or a waiter that's having a bad day, or their favorite meal is out, or the kid's birthday gets screwed up. And then you think about the digital side of the equation, like get them into a loyalty program, or how do we create some sort of recurring experience? And that very much is true for PepsiCo or Nike or IBM or Salesforce. So I can imagine very clearly how you took that then to one of the world's most iconic brands.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I think it's absolutely right. And we say this to ourselves all the time inside of PepsiCo, right? The consumer doesn't care what department or what function you're in. They see one brand, one company, and we have to work really hard to make things fit together end to end to create a better consumer experience.
And I wrote down some stats here. I want to get your arc at PepsiCo, which I imagine is chapter 4. Correct me if like chapter 4 is really
That's
skydiving
right.
or cave exploring or something. Okay. PepsiCo generates $90 billion a year in revenue. And that's up a ton. In 2007, it was about $40 billion. So it's been this huge growth. I feel like, Pepsi, it's been around forever. It's this blue chip stock, but really expanded quite substantially. Brand value is gigantic because it spans all these different divisions, right? Frito-Lay, Quaker Foods, beverages, and global, right? Latin America, Europe, Asia, Middle East. And then that includes brands like Cheetos, Gatorade, and Mountain Dew, and Doritos, and even SodaStream. and employs over 300,000 people. I know that you're now doing the employee orbit of communications, but you've had this amazing run. So let's go back in time a little bit. How did you get into the company? And then walk us through a couple of the roles, ranging from your digital and innovation roles into something now more around talent and culture.
It's been an incredible ride at PepsiCo. As you mentioned, I think the scale has made it a place where you can have multiple careers in one place. As you mentioned, we have a range of global, regional, local brands. So I really started on our Tropicana business, and I thought I was going to continue to be a brand communicator. And that was part of the role, but it also really helped me broaden into reputation management and issues management and employee engagement, a whole host of other areas that I really didn't think I was interested in at the time, but I'm really glad that I stayed open-minded and got experience in. I also touched different parts of the function back then. Consumer experience was part of the communications function. Today it sits in our insights function. But that was really looking at how consumers interact with our brands directly, right? So way back when, it was when they would call an 800 number or visit a website or send an email. But at that time, we were going through a major transformation of really trying to understand how social and digital were really breaking down geographic boundaries, and how consumers were becoming influencers in their own right, and how we really needed to build better capabilities to protect our reputation so that issues in India, for example, wouldn't make their way to the US unnecessarily because consumers were expecting a faster, higher level of service in their local area. So that was really interesting because it diverged from the traditional comms world of focusing on media and really got us much closer to the consumer and really thinking about all these new social and digital channels and how we need to build relationships with our consumers in those channels in different ways.
Amazing.
We have these interesting roles too. So I led a messaging center of excellence and a digital innovation center of excellence, while also like leading consumer experience for Quaker and for Gatorade. Again, really just learning new parts of the business, but then also extending into different parts of the function. So that was great. And then I did end up back in a more traditional communications role for back then what was called our North American nutrition business. So it was where we tried to bring all of the better for you brands together under one roof. So you mentioned some of them already, right? Many people don't know that PepsiCo owns a bunch of foods brands like Quaker or Near East, or brands like Naked Juice and Tropicana and Kavita. So some of our juice brands we are now in a joint venture in, but back then they were fully owned. So that was an interesting challenge of helping people understand that PepsiCo has the scale and the capability to bring nutrition to more people. And also very similarly, I worked across brand, reputation, employee engagement, lots of learnings there in terms of a different type of consumer, like squarely focused on the very nutrition focused consumer.
I can imagine. I mean, if you have a family at any age or any size, you're going to interact with like half of PepsiCo, I feel like. And what I think is really interesting across all these roles is you've really expanded beyond the normal, well-worn boundaries of what people think communications can do. Your recognition of the importance of emerging channels at the time, social and influencer, the importance of gathering consumer insights, the standing up of centers of excellence. Hopefully this is a hinge into your next job, but tell me a little bit about the culture that facilitates that, because your career, unlike so many people at big companies, has been the opposite of getting siloed. Your career has been truly running the bases. And I'd be interested in what that feels like within a big company to still have your skills recognized in a way where they continually push you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. So I think PepsiCo is a place that really wants to offer people opportunities to grow both personally and professionally. So I can tell you not all of my steps were steps up, right? Some of them were lateral moves where I was just interested in learning something new. Many of them were lateral moves, but I think eventually that gave you the breadth of experience to move up or to stand out from other candidates when a step up was available. So I think taking advantage of all the learning opportunities that PepsiCo offers, and that comes in many shapes and forms, right? So some of it is a new role. Some of it is traveling to learn a new market outside of the US. Some of it is more professional leadership training and things like that. But I think this has been an incredible place, and that if you're open to it, it's there for you. And I just was always hungry for all of it. So I think the culture rewards that. And it's part of what has made PepsiCo grow so much over the years, is all the people who have a similar mindset and wanting that kind of growth.
I think it's just a really interesting allegory that you were charged with incubating new capabilities, but in turn, they're incubating you as a senior leader at the company. Let's talk a little bit about where you've ended up. I understand you did some work with the foundation, and as somebody who worked in government and very focused on CSR, I'm interested in that, but then pivot from there into what you currently do. Tell me about the last couple jobs.
I went then to our global food service business, which is interesting in that I maybe didn't even recognize at the time, but it was really a B2B2C role. So that was my first time doing B2B, that we were talking to our customers. And by customers, we mean the people who are in channels where you would consume our products away from home. So think not e-commerce, not traditional retail, but like a JetBlue or a Red Lobster or a Vail Resorts, right? So literally anywhere you would consume our products away from home. We were trying to create programs that would take our brand and their brand and create something special for our shared consumer. So that was a really interesting role, again, to learn a different part of the function in the business. But also, I was a little bit less than a year into the role when COVID hit. And if you all remember, product was flying off the shelf at retail. But food service is literally everything that was shut down, right? Hotels, restaurants, airports, movie theaters, everything was shut down. But I think another thing that's made PepsiCo a really interesting place is that we've been a pioneer in winning with purpose. And by that, I mean, for a long time, I think our leaders have been really committed to running a profitable business, but doing it in a way that is beneficial to people and the planet as well. So when COVID hit and those channels were all shut down, our leaders really said to us, what can you do to support the communities that are hurting as a result? That was a really pivotal time in my career for me, because we were able to take this crisis situation and truly make a difference for people. We created a restaurant employee relief fund with the National Restaurant Association, knowing that many of our restaurant partners had workers who were living paycheck to paycheck and then suddenly had no source of income, which, and again, goes back to something very near and dear to my heart, which is the restaurant world. Lots of schools are our customers. We knew that kids not going to school meant kids not getting meals in many cases. So we partnered with No Kid Hungry and many of our celebrities partners who weren't really doing anything at the time because of COVID, but they jumped in to help raise money so that kids could get meals. We, just really thought about all the various partners and their communities that were suffering and created programs that really resonated with our customers, our consumers, and our employees. And that was really satisfying. And I was really grateful to be in that role at that time, which could have been the worst time in your career. And I felt like ended up being the most fulfilling time.
Just to recap, you're saying that you joined one of the world's largest foods for service businesses during COVID, where their business grinds to a halt. And instead of throwing your arms up, and instead of the company throwing its arms up, speaking to its values, it says, no, we're going to turn this operation into basically a giant quasi-government relief effort ranging from helping waiters and maitre d's meet their bills to making sure that kids don't suddenly encounter a food desert because their cafeterias are shut down. What an amazing way to enter the world of CSR. And by the way, using your business savvy to better connect the dots in a way that actually meaningful drives impact. I mean, literally getting calories into people's hands. I can't imagine how fun that was once things were up and running and how stressful it was to get things up and running.
Yes. It was all great work. A lot of it was in partnership with the PepsiCo Foundation.
Yeah.
And that is what led me to a role working with our foundation, which really strives to increase access to nutritious food, safe water, which is more of a problem outside of the US, and economic opportunity through educational and entrepreneurial support programs. I think COVID also changed the way we interfaced between the foundation and the business because the expectations for companies were so high to make a difference in communities. So we wanted to do a lot of work to make sure that all of our stakeholders understood the lasting impact the foundation was trying to make in communities, especially our employees, right? That was something our employees could be very proud of. So did a lot of work for our foundation, and that was very exciting. And that led me to my current role.
Tell me a little bit about what that looks like. And by the way, who that includes. I mean, is that corporate employees, warehouse employees, interns, and everything in between? Tell me just about how you even wrap your head around who your audiences are.
Yes. So it definitely includes both of our office-based employees and what we call our frontline employees. So those are the people who are deskless and they're making, moving, or selling our products. So I think that was something else that COVID did, right? I think everybody understands, right, that your employees are your most important asset. But I think COVID really helped us understand that clear, compelling communications is a critical part of the employee experience. And we really have had to work since then to step up our game and how we reach our associates, how we inspire them to come along on the transformation of the business, but also to be part of a positive culture with a sense of belonging. So that is what my team really focuses on. We do look across to all of our employees. We try to get targeted with our cohorts and our segments when we can. It's something we're still learning and getting better at. We focus on a few different things. So I have an event production and meeting services team. That's the physical part of the experience, right? When we really bring together everybody to either celebrate or understand key priorities. I also have a team that is closely partnered with our people function. So really focused on all of the work that is enterprise-wide, supporting people and culture. I have a team that is looking at how we interface on our biggest transformations like PepsiCo Positive. So we touched on that a little bit earlier, but that is our business transformation that really looks at every piece of the value chain, from how we grow our ingredients with our partner farmers all the way through how we improve things like water usage at our plants, all the way through to who are we hiring in the community and how are we making a positive impact. So there's a lot that's part of PepsiCo Positive. So really helping our employees understand and again, be proud of the work that we're doing has been a big piece of the work. And then we have other big transformations like digital evolution, for example, just knowing that we need to digitalize every part of our business. And so our associates really need to understand the value of that and how that can essentially help them down the line as well and enjoy their jobs more. So there's a lot that falls under the tent.
I was going to say this is as sweeping as expected, which I think is a good jump off point to my next question for you, which is how you're shaping communications within the company and how in particular you're working across every possible global geography across myriad different brands, across corporate employees, and as you said, frontline employees. And in particular, as every company right now is in this fight to recruit, train, and retain top talent that is so critical, not only to the culture of the company, but the success of it, in that institutional knowledge can't be replicated. How are you pulling it off?
I think, one, we are trying to be much more intentional in thinking about our employees like we think about our consumers. Really understanding how they are consuming information, not just within our walls, but as you all probably know, associates are getting just as much information externally as they are internally. So really understanding our associates on a deeper level, really making sure they're getting digestible, engaging content as well, right? So just like the rest of the world wants TikTok and X, and we really need to be concise and to the point to break through and grab their attention just like we would with our consumers. You know, I know you're interested, like data is a big piece of your world. We're definitely trying to bring that more into the fold in terms of the work that we do. So how do we start with insights? The same way we would with our consumers. So if we took one of the transformations that I mentioned, right? So digital evolution, for example, we have org health surveys and other things like that. But how do we really get a pulse on where our employees are today, right? So how do we really understand the problem to solve and where we need to move them to for the future of the business? Also think applying some of the same practices we would apply with consumers, like message testing, right? Like we can tap into our employee resource groups or other smaller groups of employees to really understand what resonates with them, what doesn't, or what resonates more with certain cohorts versus others. The channel piece and the influence piece. So I think this really just connects back to a lot of the other things we talked about, right? We know that people consume information in multiple places and are influenced by multiple people in places. So really understanding how you make all parts of the ecosystem work together to break through and connect with our different cohorts is another piece of what we're doing. And then, of course, really trying to measure impact, right? At the end of the day, did we change something in what they think, feel, or do? I think is, what we're really trying to get to. So to me, the work that we're doing in employee communications is really not that different from what I've done in my past communications and marketing roles. I think it's really just thinking about a certain cohort very differently.
Yeah, I mean, just extraordinary. I think you have this positioning I've seen in your career's messaging about dare for better and all the different ways you can apply dare for better, whether it's inventing sustainable packaging or working in R&D and flavor innovation or equipping frontline workers with emerging technologies. And to your point, trying to figure out of all the potential storylines, even internal storylines that PepsiCo can communicate, what are the most resonant ones? When should we deliver them? And to your point about, TikTok's just as relevant internally as it is externally. How do we deliver it? Tell me a little bit about the streams of data, if you will, on how you're measuring both what storylines might work preemptively and then measuring impact on the back end to figuring out what resonated. Without doing anything proprietary, tell me how you think about that. Is that like, internal blogs? Are there surveys? Are there data tools and monitoring services? What's your mix, so to speak?
I mean, and we'll tell you it's a work in progress. We're constantly trying to get better at this. But I think what you were talking about was Dare for Better is our employer brand. And that is really rooted in what we call our employee value proposition. And that is based on a body of research with our associates about why they come and why they stay at PepsiCo. So we've really had to drill down into that, right? Because I think some of the things you meant, like people come because they want to work on great brands and they want to do innovative things, right? So that's one message, right? Like what is the interesting work that we can offer and how do we enable people to better do their jobs? They also come here because they want to have a good career. As we talked about earlier, PepsiCo can really offer you that in many different ways. So we focus a lot on growth. We also have a strong culture of caring here. You touched on culture a bit earlier, and what does the company give you? Obviously, it cares about your career growth, but I think there's a really supportive community in general. So not only do we expect leaders to care, but we expect everyone to care about each other and about our local communities. I would say last, the other thing that we've learned that people really care about is making an impact. And I think PepsiCo Positive really clearly gives people a way to make a bigger impact and working on brands that have such scale. Also, you're making an impact in kitchens across the world. I mean, so obviously the EVP is sort of a moment in time research, but we do have ongoing surveys, and something else we're trying to get better at is more ongoing listening and leveraging technology to bring all of our data sources together. So whether it's how they're talking about us on external channels like Glassdoor or Fishbowl to how they're talking on internal channels. I think Yammer, now Viva Engage, or even responding to corporate emails, right? Like how do we pull all of that unstructured data very quickly into dashboards? That's a vision that we have. I won't say we're quite there yet, but definitely something we want to be doing to better listen to our associates and how they're feeling about various topics.
Given all the roles you've had and just how many things you've been able to pull off in the insights world, I have no doubt that it will soon not only be possible, but you will be market leading. I wanted to ask, by the way, as a quick aside, with Tropicana, did you work on the famous juice train?
The famous juice train? I don't think so.
Don't you remember there was that famous juice train that takes the orange juice from Florida to New York, and it went totally viral? And like there were kids around the country being like, one day when I grow up, I want to work on the famous Tropicana juice train.
I'm guessing that was before my time.
I think it probably was. I remember growing up looking at this, but nonetheless, all the things you're talking about are various initiatives that the company is doing that provide that sense of impact, that sense of belonging, that sense of no matter what job I want to pursue, what career arc I want to have, I can do it within this company. In a way, PepsiCo is its own world. And so I wanted to ask you what the internal to external hinge point looks like, whether it's, hey, we're just doing a great CSR initiative through the foundation and partnering with a local school system, to a brand activation. Who knows? Maybe we'll bring back the Tropicana juice train, all the way through more innovation initiatives like R&D and technology. I saw some employee spotlights around people taking career breaks to do PhDs and then coming back to PepsiCo. Tell me a little bit about your responsibility in the employee communication space for the overall corporate reputation of the company.
Yeah. We recognize and we have more data that shows us how we treat our employees is an important dimension of our reputation with other critical stakeholders, right? So consumers, key opinion leaders, people are paying attention. So I think how we tell the story of what we have to offer our associates is very important to building our reputation. And then also understanding there's a lot of data that shows now that your employees can be your most credible reputation builders, right? So if we're reaching them with the right message, engaging them in the right ways, and then giving them the tools, they can be incredible ambassadors. We have a program called Pep Social that's pretty small right now, but where we give our associates access to all sorts of social content that's being developed by corporate, by the brands, by different leaders, and then just making it easy for them to amplify that content with their own networks. So I think that's a big idea, right? And how we can really churn our associates into ambassadors by aiming to give them a great experience from the start.
Well, when you have 318,000 of them, talk about an amplification mechanism.
There's a lot of potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. But also the importance of message control, right? I mean, you've got 318,000 personalities as well. And even if they're well-intentioned, presenting the brand in a cohesive way, but then empowering all the employees to do it as ambassadors is a delicate balance, I can imagine,
Yes.
creativity, but cohesion.
Yeah. And in working with, my comms colleagues, I mean, we always talk about how it's an imaginary wall between internal and external. It really doesn't exist anymore. So really important to think about how our messaging with our associates can become public at any time, and vice versa, how we help our associates understand the things that we're doing externally. And as I alluded to earlier, how they are consuming information externally, right? So what are they seeing in earned media? What are they seeing in our social channels? And how are they being influenced sometimes more by those external channels often than our internal channels? So I think you're right. Like the mindset of how do you bring the inside out and the outside in is very critical in employee communications today.
I think you inadvertently just gave us the title for this episode, the quote unquote invisible wall between internal and external communications. And what a high wire act it is that you're walking. I know we're almost at time, so I wanted to ask you just one or two more questions. Let's talk about, if I had a magic wand for you and an unlimited budget, I would love to hear how you would shape the comms function of the future. And in answering that, any lessons learned you have learned over your incredible career, both, starting from the cafe all the way through one of the world's biggest corporations, in terms of lessons learned for everyday communicators hoping to embrace more digitally empowered and authentic storytelling. What's the structure to enable that? And what are some core lessons that undergird it?
Well, one, I think we would resource communications differently. I mean, we're already seeing the line between marketing and communications blur, but I think if we could give our communications colleagues some of the same investment and resources that our marketing colleagues have to continue leveraging data and developing great content, I think that would really be incredible. And I think we would fill it with people who really have a growth mindset. So people who just want to learn ongoing. The landscape around us, I think we all know, is changing so quickly. So really having that adaptability, I think also would be a key feature I would look for in team members as well, to quickly adapt. As we think about storytelling, to me, I think it really boils down to three key things. So one is to start with empathy, as we've touched on, right? So really putting yourself in the shoes of your audience and not just thinking about how they consume information, but really what does their life look like and how can we be more relevant to them and how can we add more value in what we're doing? So that's the first thing I would want all of our team members to focus on. The second piece is keeping it simple. I think we've touched on that a bit in this conversation as well. We know we have a lot to compete with. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of channels. People are experiencing information overload. So how do we really develop simple, crisp messages that really resonate with our audiences? I think is critical for any piece of storytelling. And then I think the last is to really test and learn, right? I think that there are a lot more marketing teams doing this than probably communications teams, but the digital world we live in today really gives us more capability to test and learn than ever before. So you can try out new messages, try out new approaches, try out new channels in small ways and optimize along the way before you get to something bigger.
Empathy, simplicity, testing and learning. I think not only the core pillars of any good company culture, but honestly, as somebody who has a 2-year-old, I'm realizing you're giving out free parenting advice as well. So we should take that and run with it. Last question, and this just struck me in the way that you're talking about your career. It's just this constant demonstration of intellectual agility. You are just down to learn new things constantly, and you very nicely have a company culture that rewards that. How do you approach learning on a day-to-day basis? What do you like to do to get up to speed on either parts of the business or skill sets or technologies that you've never encountered before? Are you somebody who reads 20 magazines? Are you pounding out podcasts at 1.5x speed? Are you talking to experts? Are you doing online master's courses? Like, what have you done to fuel the tank that has allowed you to have so many different diverse career arcs?
Yeah, so I would say it's a little bit of everything. Our HR partners will tell you, I think learning is like 70% on the job experience, right? And then the other 30% is a mix of formal trainings and reading industry news and things like that. So I think I definitely have had the opportunity to do a lot of on the job learning, but I would, from a day-to-day perspective, I do listen to podcasts like this, usually on my commute to and from work. I try to use that time to find some inspiration and some brain food and some good podcasts. I also try to stay engaged in industry organizations. I know you and I are both members of Page Up. There are a lot of smart people there to learn from, to network with. Also networking within people within the companies. You've mentioned PepsiCo is so massive. So if there's anything that you want to learn about, I have found it's pretty easy just to ask somebody, hey, do you want to have a coffee, or do you mind doing a quick call with me? And people are so generous with sharing what's happening in their world and from their perspective. So yes, I mean, obviously reading, we have to read as communicators to understand what's happening in the world. But then also, I mean, you mentioned I have a 14-year-old son, right? So just staying up to date with all of the evolving channels of communication and how kids are communicating these days and understanding how it works, even if it's not your personal preference. So I feel like it's just a combination of everything.
I feel like the real answer in a few words is you just relentlessly asking this question of what's going on with that. And whether that's, how does TikTok work, to how is that we, source sustainable grain or something like that. So I can only imagine how much you're able to learn at such an innovative and gigantic company every single day. Super grateful to have you on the phone. We kept you a little longer than promised, and I know how busy you are. I'm assuming that people can look you up on LinkedIn, Gina Judge at PepsiCo. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining an episode of Signal and the Noise. We're grateful for all the wisdom you shared, and I'm sure we'll be in touch through at least one of the upcoming conferences through Page. So I'll see you in person, not too distant future.
Definitely see you there. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.